Hello and welcome back, Jackson Masters. This is the reading of Craniopagus by Copper Rose, Chapter 7. There were alarm bells going off in John's head immediately. No. John didn't know exactly what kind of relationship Johnny and Ashes had, but absolutely not. He didn't think about Basira this way at all, and he didn't even know this Ashes person, so he certainly didn't want to be kissing either of them. This couldn't happen. What if Daisy found out? What if Martin walked in and saw them like this? No, he wasn't allowing this. He gripped their shoulders and shoved them away as hard as he could. Ashes stumbled a bit, but kept their footing. He could only gawk back, wide-eyed, because this was not how he expected any of this to go at all. But Ashes seemed much less fazed. They glared at him with those hard eyes, searching his face for something, and looking furious that they apparently weren't finding in there. He almost missed it, but suddenly they had a switchblade from their pocket. Not one of Johnny's makeshift knives, but a proper blade, meant and designed to kill someone. "So you're not Johnny, then?" They growled at him, and he was suddenly fairly sure they were about to kill him. Not at the moment?" That was, apparently, the wrong answer. They lunged forward and slashed at him. He tried to block and received a long cut along his arm for his troubles. With the next motion, they tried to stab downward, and he attempted to catch their wrist, but John was not Johnny. He had no such coordination. Instead, the blade pierced straight through his hand. He let out a horrified pain scream and acted on instincts that certainly weren't his. He brought them together in a headbutt that dazed them both for a moment, before he grabbed them by the throat and slammed them into the wall. Once, twice, thrice. He might have done it a fourth, but Ashes kicked at his knee, and his feet out went from under him. John went to the ground, but he managed to grab a fistful of Ash's hair, and he pulled them down with him. From there, the two became a flurry of punching and kicking and biting and screaming. During it all, he was fairly certain that Johnny was trying to talk to him, trying to get him to calm down, to relay some kind of message to Ashes, but he didn't care. "Shut the fuck up, Johnny!" he hissed back at some point. More hatred in his voice than he ever thought he was capable of. And then he just kept going, kept punching and clawing, and dear God, he wanted to hurt them. No. Not hurt. He wanted to kill them. The knife found its way out of the stab wound in John's hand at some point, and through the scuffle it was traded back and forth. Slashes and stabs were exchanged and healed too quickly to do any permanent damage. John had cut open their throats twice before he realized that breathing wasn't exactly a priority of theirs. Ashes was happy to return the favor, stabbing him repeatedly in the gut before he wrestled the blade away from them. He lost a finger, but they lost an eye. His heel was slashed through, but their knee was shattered. It was all too painful for John to even describe, but he couldn't stop the fury that drove him to keep fighting. It was hard to say exactly how long it had gone on for, but by the time the two had finally stopped, there was blood everywhere, all over the floor, the walls themselves, and even a bit of the ceiling. If they didn't know any better, one would have thought a dozen people had bled out in that room. They both were sitting on opposite sides of the showers, breathing heavy and staring at each other. It was hard to say which had done more damage. At the moment, Ashes had a long gash along their face, going from their mouth to almost their ear. The scar mimicked an uneven kind of smile, maybe even the kind that distortion might have worn. Meanwhile, Johnny was fairly certain his leg was broken in two places. It all seemed so superficial. They both healed so quickly that each blow barely seemed to matter in the end. Their skin was already knitting itself back together, and his bones were already popping into place, like it was nothing at all. In truth, did anything they had just really done mattered in the end? They were both immortal, so continuing to fight like this would only serve to make more of a mess. Moreover, all the anger and hate had bled away, leaving behind only exhaustion for the both of them. After a long moment, Johnny spoke up. "You finally done?" "Yes," John said softly. "I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me." From the other side of the room, there was a small chuckle. Ashes was grinning at them, their slowly healing wound severing for making a quite uncomfortable scene, but there was an almost fondness in their eyes, like they actually genuinely liked him. "You're apologizing? Well, now I know you're not, Johnny." They laughed, but with only a little struggle. You sure do fight like Johnny. They spoke the words like an accusation and a praise all rolled in one. Well, he's been rubbing off on me, I suppose. He meant it to sound bold and maybe cryptic, but instead, the response he got was snorting and laughter from the two fronts as Johnny and Ashes apparently couldn't help themselves. Yeah? I didn't realize I was interrupting, they cracked. I can come back later if you want to finish up. Good lord, are you both children? He grumbled. Was this how all the mechanisms behaved? Surely at least one of them had to be a proper adult, right? Ashes had only laughed harder at that. They barely seemed like they were in pain at all, and in fact their bruising and cut skin had almost entirely patched itself back together. John's leg was basically healed as well. He pulled his knees to his chest and gave a tired sigh. This wasn't how he expected the day to go. Not at all. Both? They pried then, eyeing him curiously. So, Johnny is actually awake in there. Good. Was worried he was still sleeping and I'd have to keep fighting off this bitch in my head until he got his shit together. What the fuck are they talking about? Johnny demanded. They're making it sound like... Are you talking about Basira? John's eyes went wide, sitting up straight to get a better look at them. He hadn't meant to sound so excited, but until that moment, he had just accepted that Basira was never real at all. Now, though, she wasn't just some persona you made up or identity you stole, like the soldier did with Nicola? Nah, I'm in the same shit boat you're in. Ashes shrugged. Is she okay? He asked, sounding perhaps a bit too hopeful. How long have you known? Does she... Look, they started, holding up their hand to stop him. I'm not looking to get your hopes up. You two aren't going to be around much longer, so there really isn't any reason to worry about her. John went still, a crestfallen feeling swept over him. He looked down in a way, and struggled not to let his emotions get the better of him. They were right. He wouldn't be alive much longer. He had known that, of course, but he hadn't thought anyone else would be going with him. Basira didn't deserve this. It wasn't right. Suddenly, a growl came from the back of his throat, and it certainly wasn't John's doing. Johnny had apparently managed to force his way to the surface without meaning to. He'd let himself be surprised for just a moment before he was glaring daggers at Ashes. You got a lot of nerve. You and the rest of the crew helped Raph get me to her lab, and it might have been fuzzy, but I can remember that much. So I know you don't think I'm dumb enough to believe that you just let her do the same thing to you as well. To their credit, Ashes did have the manners to look at least a little bit sheepish at the accusation. I mean, yeah, we helped at first. Thought it'd be kind of funny seeing you turned into a nervous little nerd instead of the trigger-happy killer we all know. At first it was kind of funny. We all had a good laugh about it. They shrugged a bit. Well, except for Brian, he was really insistent we do not do it. Said something about Raph not acting right. We assumed he was just in boring mode. He gave them a curious look. So, he tried to stop you? For the briefest moment, the gears in his heart turned a little faster at the idea of one of his crew tried to come to his defense. So we tied him up and buried him. They laughed back, and suddenly the gears weren't moving quite as quick. Decided to leave him there until the experiment was over. Held a funeral for him and everything. You were there, actually, though that was right after the new personality was put in, so it was kind of still getting used to being a person. Barely talked at all. Just kind of moped around like it was a real funeral, which I guess makes sense, actually. What? Are they talking about my grandmother's funeral? John sounded absolutely devastated at that. What the hell is wrong with your crew? John kept making horrified little sounds in the back of their head, which contrasted Johnny's hearty laugh. Are you serious right now? John hissed. Your friend tried to defend you, and you're laughing about him being buried alive. Buried in the place my grandmother, I remind you. Johnny was still snickering, not even trying to fight it back. Would you relax, Sims? We've done way worse than bury each other alive. And I might remind you, your grandma wasn't even real. No doubt. John scoffed, sounding hurt. This whole affair is proof enough of exactly what kind of people you all are. John, don't be like that. It's not a big... It is to me. he snapped. It's a big deal to me. She's real to me. She might have been some joke your friends made up, but she's my grandmother. I have memories of her. She's real to me, so don't you dare tell me how to feel about this. Shit. Okay, I get it. I shouldn't have said that. Johnny spoke gently. Look, when we're done here, we can go dig up Brian. Would that help? John hesitated for a moment before he gave a ragged sigh. I don't know. Maybe I'd rather not he be buried in her place, or in general. I'd like it if we left her grave. She might not be real, but, well, as I said. You're seriously talking to it? Their conversation was interrupted by Ashes then, their eyes focused on them curiously. Thought you'd hate the guy. I know I can't stand this thing in my head. Johnny shrugged. I don't know. What can I say? He's grown on me. But then he had to pause. Was he growing fond of John? Yes, he supposed he was. It was kind of like having a little brother, or like they were really twins, like the distortion had said. It was strange to think of that way, considering those entities clearly had quite a skewed outlook on the word, but perhaps in their own way, they were right. He decided he didn't want to think about it too hard. No, instead he wanted answers. More importantly, how did you end up as Basira? I can't imagine you agreed to be a lab rat if given the option. Nah, that's the thing. I think Brian might have been right, they admitted, though it looked as though they were a bit embarrassed to do so. After we set you up as Sims, it was only supposed to go until you graduated uni, so we were just gonna do our own thing for a little while. Nothing crazy, you know. Ivy said something about finding some old library somewhere in Egypt. Nastya was hiding in the vents last time I seen her. She was kind of weird about the experiment. Said she'd just keep her out of it. Wouldn't come out even if to help bury Brian. We almost went in to look for her, but the Aurora did not like that, which made pretty known pretty quick. So we left her be. So the only members of my crew who cared at all were Nastya and Brian? Do you see this, John? A bunch of no-good mutineers. That's all I've got to work with. Johnny practically shouted, throwing his hands up in frustration. Does no one have any respect for their captain? First mate, Ashes corrected at once, and Johnny could only glare and flip them off. Wait, I thought you said you were the captain of the Aurora. I am, Johnny snapped at once. Are you talking to Sims again? Don't lie to the man. Ashes laughed and began to speak directly to John himself. Whatever he told you, he's full of shit. We don't have a captain, and even if we did, it wouldn't be Johnny. Oh, I see. So we're lying to each other now? Okay, 1, fuck you, Ashes. 2, John, I don't want to hear anything about lies. I was in your head this whole time, and you spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to convince both me and yourself that you didn't have a crush on... Not in front of them, John insisted. They don't need to know that. As if everyone doesn't already know, he humphed, but looked back to Ashes. Would you tell me already what happened to the rest of the crew? They gave him an odd look and a crooked grin, clearly amused by what they could hear of their conversation, but eventually they continued. Well, you'll be happy to know that the toy soldier kept acting all worried about you. He scoffed, clearly not happy about at all that information. It really thought that we should have been keeping an eye on you. No clue what it was afraid of, but it definitely seemed afraid of something. I just figured it was Mother Henning over you. Eventually Gunpowder got sick of it and told it to fuck off, so it fucked off. Johnny nodded along as though that made perfect sense. I'm guessing that would have been around the time they joined the circus? John wondered. Though, I have been thinking on that. We know Nicola existed before. I would have been planted in your mind, so... do you suppose the toy soldier replaced them somehow? That could make sense, Johnny agreed. Maybe it decided to join the circus to better keep an eye on me? Yeah, maybe. Ashes nodded along. While they spoke, they dug into their pockets and pulled out a blood-soaked pack of cigarettes. They gave it a crooked frown and expected the cigarettes inside. Eventually, they must have decided that they were fine because they shrugged as though accepting the state they were in. Johnny's eyes lit up and they extended a hand expectingly. Oh, thank fuck, give me one of those. I need something after that fight. Get your own, they scoffed, but it was clearly playful. You weren't even the one fighting. Have Sims come back out and he can have one. You really want to make this into another fight, O'Reilly? Because I'm fine with being here all day if I have to be. It was mostly a hollow threat. Johnny didn't actually want to fight at that moment. What he wanted was a damn cigarette and maybe to lie down. When was the last time they had actually properly slept in a real bed and not just a cot or Georgie's couch? It must have been months at that point. Ashes rolled their eyes but smiled, not knowing anything of where his mind was wandering. Then they stood and made their way across the room. They sat beside them and lit their own cigarette. Well, I suppose I don't mind sharing. They were leaning into him, giving him a look that spoke 1,000 words. They let one of their hands move up, carting it through his hair before settling on his face. Their thumb lightly stroked his cheek and smudged a bit of blood there. It was soft and intimate, which was highly uncommon for most of the crew of the Aurora, at least most of the time. But just because it was rare didn't mean it never happened. It had been a long time since the two of them had been together, especially like this. Even if they hadn't been aware of their own absence, they could still feel it, in a way. They wouldn't say it, both too stubborn to do so, but they missed each other, had missed the warmth of each other's bodies and their fiery personality. For a moment, Johnny was tempted to kiss them again and see where that took them. Maybe it would just be a kiss, or maybe they would fuck in these bloody showers, and then burn this damn building to the ground afterwards, but then he remembered John, and he cursed to himself, more than anything else, with more reluctance than he would have liked. Johnny drew back. Ashes visibly frowned at that, and Johnny was furious with his rotten luck. Ashes. His tone was more gentle than either of them were used to. Not while John's in here, yeah? He doesn't do that sort of thing. And if he's not okay with it, then, I can't. Besides, we'd probably traumatize him with the things we get up to. Ashes looked surprised and a bit of something else. Not embarrassed, but perhaps regretful? Shit, I wouldn't have jumped you in the showers if I'd known that. It's just, after the show you were putting on in the archive and the way you kept looking at me, I honestly thought you were flirting. Johnny chuckled but shook his head. I kept looking at you because I thought you were there to watch and laugh at me being Sims. Yeah, right, they scoffed, as if I'd ever pretend to be a cop. Not a chance. Still, he smiled and sighed fondly. Maybe later, when we find Raph and get her to fix this. They wore a disappointed kind of smile, but they nodded before lighting a second cigarette. They passed one off to Johnny, and the pair took a long drag before either of them bothered to speak again. What were we talking about? Johnny asked absently. Your crew. John answered before Ashes could. He sounded rather bashful, and he got the feeling that he had never been in such an intimate situation. Scratch that. Johnny knew he had never been in such an intimate situation before. Even with Georgie, the pair had never been so physically involved as Johnny and Ashes were. His kisses had always been chaste and a bit reluctant, though that was before he knew he was asexual and had been wrecked with shame that he didn't feel what he thought he was supposed to feel about his girlfriend. Of course, he knew better now. He knew his lack of interest in sex was nothing to be ashamed of, but that didn't stop him from feeling uncomfortable and embarrassed to be present for their intimate moment, and it was hard for Johnny not to feel bad about it. Right. What happened with the rest of the crew? Johnny nodded, and he hoped he could distance himself from that soft moment they had just shared. Ashes? Yeah, the crew. They began after another puff of their cigarette. Well, Maris and Liv basically left as soon as we finished burying Brian. You know how Liv gets. Still finds this kind of stuff distasteful. So Marius talked into them playing house for a while. Being domestic or some shit like that. Ashes and Johnny both blanched with disgust at the thought. Really? I thought you were a proud omnisexual. You and Ashes have been looking at each other like you want to... John paused, seemingly struggling to find the words he was looking for. It didn't surprise him that he was still bashful about it, but it was hard to fight the laugh that wanted to escape him. Well, I mean, didn't you say before you all dated? This seems a bit juvenile, especially when you've been insisting that I need to ask Martin out. Johnny gave a disgusted sound and took a long drag of his cigarette before he responded. John, I cannot stress enough how different Martin is compared to Marius. We have our own brand of romance when we bother trying to dating. Some of us run hot and heavy, some of us are more subtle with our approach, and Marius is the worst. Ashes cut in. Or at least he can be, Johnny added. He's prone to trying to do these big, sweeping, grand gestures of affection, and sometimes that's fine when he gets it right. Sometimes those gestures are, how did Ivy describe it, Ashes? Romance for the sake of romance, they said with a grimace. Like taking us to fancy restaurants and carriage rides, stuff like that, which I'm sure for some of us would probably enjoy. But can you imagine Johnny wanting to have poetry read to him, or would want to sit around talking about his feelings? Or Toy Soldier, you think it's interested in a 4-course meal? It doesn't even have a stomach. I honestly don't know what he's thinking. John laughed at the questions. Talking about your feelings? Absolutely not. And I suppose making a meal for someone that doesn't need to eat is quite silly, but why not all the other things? I feel like you would appreciate poetry. I'm more about music than poetry, though I can appreciate it sometimes, he admits with a shrug. Don't get me wrong, he's one of us, and he can be great fun. Sometimes when he arranges things, he gets it spot on. Like when he found a mostly unexplored moon and took Rafaela and Ivy there, so they could do some experiments and document everything. They loved that shit. But sometimes it feels like he's trying too hard. Perhaps trying too hard is just how he shows his love. What? Isn't that a thing? Acts of service is a form of love language, he suggested. Perhaps he feels drawn to big displays like that. Hell, maybe he is even hoping someone will return the favor. Johnny scoffed and then stopped. He hadn't really thought about it that way before. Marius could be rather affectionate, but it never occurred to him that he might want someone to sweep him off his feet like he often tried to do for them. Something like that wasn't his nature most of the time, but he had made accommodations for his partners in the past, just as they frequently accommodated his needs. It occurred to him then that he might have been neglecting his partners a bit, and that simply wouldn't do. "Aw, fuck," he groaned, earning a curious look from Ashes. "Sims makes a good point. I think I'm gonna have to try to be at least a little bit more romantic the next time we date, at least with Marius." Ashes laughed and shook their head. "If you say so. I'm pretty sure sometimes he does the whole overly romantic act because it annoys us all so much. Even if Liv doesn't like it sometimes." "Yeah, but the things that annoy Liv could fill the whole archive at this point." Johnny sighed, slinging his arm around their shoulder. "I hate to sound like Brian here, but this might be a communication issue which we may have to fix." Ashes gave a long, dramatic groan. We need to get this guy out of your head. I can't have you being the responsible one. You're both ridiculous, you know that." "Yeah, well, I'm blaming you for this, John," he half-joked. "If you weren't stuck on your own little office crush, I wouldn't be getting the residual effects from them." If John could roll his eyes in that moment, he would have done so immediately. "Oh, please, why can't you just admit that you also find him attractive? He's kind and soft and handsome, and he's always trying to take care of us regardless of what you say. I know you like all of that about him." Johnny could feel himself going red in the face at that. He wanted to argue with John that he was wrong and say some more about those emotions just being overflow from his own feelings for Martin, but whenever he thought about their sweet, caring assistant, the gears of his traitorous, mechanical heart began to spin much too fast. This wasn't typically how he came to romance. Even with the other mechanisms, his stomach didn't flutter and he didn't feel overwhelmed just by the thought of talking to them. He certainly liked them. He might even say he loved them if they got him drunk enough, but he didn't get this way for just anyone. It had to be John's fault. Since we're on the subject, Ashes cut in with a grin. I couldn't help but notice the way you were making eyes at the big guy in the archive. Almost made me a little jealous. What exactly is going on there? Nothing, Johnny insisted at once, perhaps too quickly. I just mean, look, that's a question for John, and he doesn't want me talking about it, so I'm not talking about it. Oh, really? John laughed, sounding rather doubtful. By all means, I'd love to hear how you plan to explain it to them. Anyways, he insisted through gritted teeth, just finish explaining. What about the rest of you? That just left Tim and me. They carried on, but they were still smiling as they did so, like they could see right through their terrible attempt at deflecting the question. We hadn't left the Aurora yet. We're still drinking and talking about plans for how we were going to establish ourselves on this new planet. Thought about rehashing our old Hades and Persephone act. Mob boss and their own Camdy wife. Mob boss? John almost sighed, hearing the words. He sounded more frustrated than curious. But Johnny only nodded along yet again, smiling fondly at the memory. Tim really did make that dress work back in the city. Exactly, Ashes agreed, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. But before we even got too far into planning, it got all fuzzy. Guess Raphael spiked our drinks with something pretty strong. Next thing I knew, well, I was waking up in some cop's head. Took me a second to realize what must have happened, but it sure as fuck freaked her out. Kept accusing me of being some new trick made up by Elias, but I had no fucking clue who even that was at the time. They didn't know who Elias was, John cut in. Ashes couldn't hear, but Johnny gestured for them to stop so he could listen to him. Weren't you aware of pretty much everything about me when you woke up? Yeah, basically, Johnny confirmed, ignoring the look he got from Ashes. Maybe it's the eye again? Like I can somehow see more in your head than Ashes can see in Basira's? Because I'm the archivist? John finished his train of thought. Or perhaps both of us are the archivist at this point. That's what Michael and Helen said, isn't it? Or at least they seem to think that's how it works. He groaned at the very suggestion. I cannot stress enough how much I do not want to be the archivist. The feeling is mutual at this point, but I highly doubt either of us have a choice in the matter. Wait, you can see into his head? Like, you can see his memories, or whatever? Ashes asked, sounding annoyed at the realization that Johnny clearly had a stronger connection with his Dumble than they did their own. All because of your job? The running theory is that the power of the eye is keeping John, and I guess also Basira, from being erased like they were supposed to. He tried to explain. Basira served the eye, however unwillingly, but John is clearly more important to it for whatever reason, so I guess that makes a stronger connection, but it also means we're kind of blending together. What? Ashes demanded. They shrugged off Johnny's arm from their shoulder and flicked away what was left of their cigarette. What exactly does that mean? I kind of feel what he feels, and vice versa. It's why he snapped like that when you fought earlier. Why he's been doing a lot of things, I suspect. He looked embarrassed by how worried they were getting for him. It hasn't been his intent to cause them panic, but he had clearly just done that. But I figured once we find the Aurora, we can make Raph fix this. Ashes nodded along, though they still looked worried. You mentioned TS, or I guess the other you did anyway. Does it know where the ship is? I didn't think to ask, he admitted. I kinda left it in a building when I lit it up. Suddenly, Ashes looked almost offended. Did you commit arson without me? Wow, Johnny, I see how it is. Are they being serious right now? Johnny just sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Now really isn't the time for this, Ashes. I promise you and me will burn down the whole of London if you really want. But only after we've dealt with this. Fine. Ashes agreed, but still didn't look pleased. So what's the plan? At the moment? Johnny asked, flicking away the last of his own cigarette and giving an annoyed sigh. I guess wash off, considering you've covered us in blood all over again. I don't appreciate that you're ignoring me. Johnny didn't respond, just stood and made his way back to the shower that they had left running. It had been long since gone cold, but it was best to get done before the blood dried again. "You know I live in London, right?" Ashes gave a thoughtful sound, not getting up yet, just watching him from where they sat. "You figured Martin would be back by now. He left ages ago." There was then a long pause between them before they spoke again. "Hey, can you explain something to me?" "Maybe. Depends on what it is," he answered back, absently scrubbing away the new blood that was covering them. John gave an annoyed sigh, clearly not appreciating that he was being annoyed, and Johnny couldn't help but laugh a bit at his frustration. "Who the hell is Daisy?" They sounded genuinely annoyed by the question. "What?" The question seemed to evaporate all of John's frustration, replacing it with confusion instead. How do they not know who Daisy is? "That is a great question," Johnny agreed before looking to Ashes. "How the fuck do you not know who Daisy is?" "Because she won't tell me!" They snapped back at them. Johnny must have given them an odd look because they gave an annoyed grunt back. "The damn cop! She's in here with me, but she stopped answering my questions last night once I managed to take over. It was a struggle just to find out where the bitch worked this morning. And after everyone left the archive earlier, I tried to get details, but she wouldn't say a damn thing to me except when I asked about Daisy." "Except?" Johnny cocked his eyebrow at them. "What did they say?" "To fuck off," they huffed. "And that they wouldn't tell me anything about Daisy, so I might as well just leave it alone." "Oh, yes, that would make sense," John suggested. He sounded worried then. "Perhaps we should respect her privacy for the time being?" "Fuck that," Johnny scoffed. "Daisy is like the werewolf girlfriend or whatever." "Johnny!" "What?" he demanded. "She was gonna show up eventually anyways. Would you rather Ashes not knowing how to interact with her at all?" While they bickered, Ashes went wide-eyed. Suddenly, a number of things were all happening at once. Their breathing had become heavy, and blood was trickling from their nose. A blood vessel seemed to burst in one of their eyes, and they shoved themselves away from the wall, hard, scrambling to their feet and to get as far away from them as they could get. "Ashes." Johnny spoke gently, but that didn't calm them in the slightest. "You stay the fuck away from me!" they screamed, their eyes immediately flicking to the switchblade that was several feet away from them both. They looked like they were considering diving for it. "Johnny, I don't think that's Ashes." "Shit," he muttered to himself softly. "Okay, easy, Ashes." "Basira!" John scolded him. "Right, fuck, Basira," he corrected himself. "Look, this is all just a little confusing. Let's just—" "Get out!" she demanded. The look in their eyes was like a cornered animal, terrified, but willing to fight and kill if it meant escape. All right, I'll go," he insisted, and started to move towards the exit, but she surged forward and shoved him hard into the wall. He kept his footing, but was already debating if this was about to be yet another fight. "No, get out of his head," she snapped then. "I want to talk to John, not whatever the fuck you are." He sighed then, resisting the urge to fight back. This was one of their assistants, after all. "All right, fine. I don't talk to cops, anyway." It was easier this time. The transition was seamless, not even the smell of copper or struggle. It bothered John, just a bit, at the realization that the two of them were actually getting good at this. Pretty soon the pair might actually be able to switch without the need to think about it, or even the need to be shocked to the surface. Or they might even blend so completely that there truly wouldn't be a difference between them. It was a frightening thought, and he gave a ragged breath as he dwelled on it. "Oh, okay," he spoke in a shaking voice. "Okay, it's me." "We need to talk about this." Basira's tone and stare were undeniably a threat. "I want some goddamn answers." "Yeah? You and me both." Both of them gasped and pushed away from each other at the realization that they weren't as alone as they thought they were. Standing there in the doorway was Tim, with Martin not far behind him. Though he seemed unwilling to look in their direction at all, the look they both wore was best be described as overwhelmed. They both shook, but Tim stood firm in the doorway, like he thought he could hold them both back. He looked between them both like he was struggling to hold onto reality. Eventually his eyes settled on John. They drifted downwards to his chest, to where the metal heart that hadn't been there before was now on full display. His encounter with the distortion, followed by his fight with Ashes, it made him forget about his new brass body part, basically immediately, but its appearance was not lost on Tim. It didn't take Eliza's power to read minds, to know exactly what he was thinking. This thing appeared on him immediately after he managed to escape the circus. He could see in Tim's eyes exactly what he must have been thinking. And then he looked away, like he couldn't stand to look at John a second longer. A black bag was tossed into the center of the room then. "Get dressed," he ordered in a harsh tone, "and you better fucking thank Martin, because I would have been glad to let you wander around looking like the monster you are." With that, he turned and stormed away around the corner. "Ooh, fuck," John muttered. "How much of all of that do you think they saw?" It was only at that moment that John even considered the question, and the only answer he could form was to parrot back an exhausted, "Oh, fuck." That's it for today, everybody. This was a monster of a chapter, gonna be honest. It took 3 days or so, at least without the breaks, of consistent recording to actually get it done. It ends up being 35 plus minutes, and whoo boy, it's been a month or so from when I last posted, and honestly, I can no longer say that I post regularly. I guess this is just, I guess as soon as I saw this as something I needed to do, it got less fun for me. Does anyone else have that? Where as soon as you, like, need to do something, like, even if it's something you like, it just, as soon as I feel like I need to do it, like, I lose all motivation to do it. It's no longer joy-based. It's priority-based. You know? Like, as soon as I needed to draw, to practice more, to get better, I kind of stopped drawing for a bit. I hadn't drew or painted in months until I just stopped thinking like that. You know? Anyways, that's my little tidbit for today. Anyway, love you guys, because there's like 5 people who still watch this. 2 of them being my friends, and the 3 being random people and Craniopagus. Anyway, bye. Make sure to drink water.